Why does altitude cause headache? Since the air is thinner, there is less oxygen in the blood, so blood flow to the brain increases. The extra blood can cause blood vessels to swell and tissues to press on the sensitive membrane that surrounds the brain, resulting in a headache. But not everyone develops a headache at moderately high altitudes, partly because the low oxygen content of the air causes the climber to breathe more often, forcing carbon dioxide out of the blood. The body reacts to the lowered carbon dioxide content of the blood by decreasing blood flow to the brain. An individual's susceptibility to altitude-induced headache, as well as the severity of the headache, depends on whether the overall blood flow to the brain increases or decreases. At high altitudes, usually over 10,000 feet, an unrelated condition known as high-altitude cerebral edema, or ASE, can develop. ASE occurs when parts of the brain become waterlogged. Unlike altitude-induced headache, which occurs in over 90% of the people who ascend to 11,000 feet, ASE is a rare disorder. Characterized by mental confusion, hallucinations, and a drunken stagger, ASE is almost always fatal if descent is not immediate. Evolution is a scientific theory used by biologists. It explains how living things change over a long time and how they have come to be the way they are. The Earth has been around for a very long time. By doing research on the layers of rock, we can find out about its past. That kind of research is called historical geology. We know that living things have changed over time because we can see their remains in the rocks. These remains are called fossils. So, we know that the animals and plants of today are different from those of long ago, and the further we go back, the more different the fossils are.
When human females are pregnant, they're advised to stay away from alcohol, for fear of harming the fetus, and most parents refrain from giving their infants bottles full of whiskey or beer, for obvious reasons. But if you're a fruit fly, literally dousing your offspring in alcohol is apparently one of the best ways to protect them from danger, particularly from certain types of wasps. How and why? Let's back up a bit. First, certain types of wasps prey on fruit flies by injecting eggs inside fruit fly larvae. Unless an infected larva kills the wasp egg, it hatches, and the wasp larva eats its way out from inside the fruit fly larva, killing it. One way for fruit fly moms to protect against this gruesome fate is to lay their eggs in an alcohol-soaked environment, such as fermenting fruit.
How has this come about? That evolution has taken place is a fact, because it is overwhelmingly supported by many lines of evidence. At the same time, evolutionary questions are still being actively researched by biologists. Comparison of DNA sequences allows organisms to be grouped by how similar their sequences are. In 2010, an analysis compared sequences to phylogenetic trees, and supported the idea of common descent. There is now strong quantitative support for a formal test for the unity of life. The theory of evolution is the basis of modern biology. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. A UFO, unidentified flying object, is any object flying in the sky which cannot be identified by the person who sees it. Sometimes, the object is investigated. If people can still not figure out what the project is after an investigation, it's called a UFO. If they figure out what the object is, it can no longer be called a UFO because it has been identified. Even though UFOs can be anything, people often use the word UFO when they're talking about alien spacecraft. Flying saucer is another word that is often used to describe an unidentified flying object. Studies estimate that 50 to 90% of all reported UFO sightings are identified later, usually 10 to 20% are never identified. Studies also show that very few UFO sightings are hoaxes, people trying to trick other people. Most UFOs are actually natural or man-made objects that look strange. 80 to 90% of UFOs are identified as one of three different things: astronomical causes, for example, planets, stars, or meteors; aircraft, balloons, including weather balloons. 10 to 20% of UFOs are other causes, such as birds, clouds, mirages, searchlights, etc. Let's look at the size of rain and how raindrops fall. First, we'll need the sun. When the sun shines on water on the Earth's surface, the heat of the sun warms the water, turning it into an invisible gas called water vapor. This process, the changing of water into a gas, is called evaporation. Because gases are lighter than liquids, water vapor rises up into the sky, and the further you move up and away from the Earth's surface, the colder the temperature gets. So in the sky, the water vapor cools and changes back into tiny water droplets. This change is called condensation, and is the opposite of evaporation. Clouds are made up of tiny water droplets. So, when condensation occurs in the sky, clouds form and grow. Let's take a closer look. When water droplets bump into one another, they stick together and grow in size. They continue to grow until they are too heavy and fall as rain. They even grow as they bump into one another on their journey from the cloud to the ground, and every single raindrop that reaches the ground is made up of 1 million of the original tiny water droplets. Raindrops fall on the ground surface, or the sun can shine on them, and the whole process happens again. This is called the water cycle, and keeps water moving from the ground to the sky, providing the water needed for plants, animals, and people to survive. Humans are pretty lucky with the way we can communicate. Unlike animals, we have the perfect length necks and excellent control of our breaths. Both of these characteristics allow us to form words. Although animals can't talk like us, they still have special ways to communicate. For example, dolphins have one of the most sophisticated forms of communication. They make distinct whistling sounds that help identify themselves. Dolphins may also squeak or yelp depending on the situation. Nevertheless, each sound releases meaningful information. You have probably heard some birds say words just like us, but they are merely repeating what they hear. Most birds communicate through songs and squawks that can be beautiful for us to listen to.
The preservation of embryos and juveniles is a rare occurrence in the fossil record. The tiny, delicate skeletons are usually scattered by scavengers or destroyed by weathering before they can be fossilized. Ichthyosaurs had a higher chance of being preserved than did terrestrial creatures because, as marine animals, they tended to live in environments less subject to erosion. Still, their fossilization required a suite of factors: a slow rate of decay of soft tissues, little scavenging by other animals, a lack of swift currents and waves to jumble and carry away small bones, and fairly rapid burial. Given these factors, some areas have become a treasury of well-preserved ichthyosaur fossils. The deposits at Holzminden, Germany, present an interesting case for analysis.
What is precipitation? Clouds hold millions of tiny water droplets. Over time, a cloud can hold more and more tiny droplets of water and pieces of ice. Wind and temperature make the droplets and pieces bump into each other. They then group together, they get bigger and heavier until they are too heavy to stay in the cloud. They fall to the ground as something called precipitation. Precipitation can include rain, snow, hail, or sleet. Precipitation can form into different types. This is because the differences in temperatures. If the air between the cloud and the ground is warm, the precipitation will fall as rain. If the rain freezes between the cloud and the ground, it becomes sleet. There are 118 species of weaver birds, and most live in sub-Saharan Africa. While some species live on the open savanna and eat mostly seeds, others live in forests and prefer feasting on insects. Researchers looked at studies done on different species of weaver birds to examine the relationships between their diets, habits, and social behavior. They found that seed-eating birds living in the open savanna tended to forage in groups, nest in large colonies, and have multiple mates per breeding season. The insect-eating, forest-dwelling birds, on the other hand, were more likely to forage and nest alone, and have a single mate per season. These divergent social behaviors are likely influenced by their different diets and habitats. Working together makes it easier for birds that eat seeds out on the savanna to find spots with a large supply of seeds. There's also safety in numbers out on the open savanna, further incentivizing flocking. Their polygamous breeding may be a result of the smaller number of nesting sites in the savanna. By contrast, working together to find food wouldn't help forest-dwelling, insect-eating weaver birds as much, since insects tend to be more widely dispersed. There are a lot more suitable nesting sites in the forest, so these birds don't need to live in colonies, and monogamy makes sense for birds with more solitary lives. It seems that birds that eat bugs don't like to be bugged.
English, as you have already read, is not a pure language. I don't think there really are any pure languages in the world, but English is definitely not a pure language. English, in fact, has borrowed from over 350 languages in its history, so it's a variety of many languages. Some people say it's like a dog, a mongrel dog, a dog that has been made up of many different dogs. The English language is like that. By looking at the history of the English language, we learn about the history of the English people. The two things are closely connected. So, in fact, today we are not only learning about language but we are learning about history. The fact that English has borrowed words from over 350 languages has been viewed differently throughout history. So, for example, in Shakespeare's time people were very angry about words, which were not, they thought, original English words, words which came from other languages. They didn't like them.
Dogs are noted for their extreme friendliness towards humans. They crave human company and gaze intently at their human companions. The partnership between dogs and humans stretches back tens of thousands of years into prehistoric times. It has worked out surprisingly well for dogs, who, with human backing, have become Earth's most abundant land carnivore. Dogs from wolves, through a process of domestication by humans. Even when they are hand-raised by humans, modern wolves seldom show the degree of devotion to humans that dogs do. This has led scientists to suspect that the hypersociality of dogs towards humans is more than just a learned trait, and has to do with evolved genetic differences between dogs and wolves. In 2022, a team of American geneticists published findings identifying genetic differences between dogs and wolves that may be responsible for the special canine attachment to humans. On chromosome number 6 of the dog genome, the researchers identified several genes associated with dog hypersociality. Interestingly, these genes correspond to parts of the human genome that also are involved in social behavior. Specifically, mutations in the corresponding part of the human genome can lead to a rare condition called Williams-Buren syndrome. People with this syndrome have hypersocial behavior like that of dogs, along with certain cognitive deficits. Researchers have found evidence that dogs may have cognitive deficits like those of people with this syndrome. When something angers us, humans have rapid cognitions that motivate us to improve our mood. But anger itself can inhibit our ability to reach equilibrium. We see this in how angry people ruminate on how bad they feel, or how they try to vent their anger and end up prompting aggression. So, there must be better ways to regulate emotion aside from ruminating and venting that help keep aggression at bay. And it turns out, that has a lot to do with how much a person is aware of and able to classify their emotions. This is called emotion differentiation. For example, if people lack the capacity to describe and classify what they are feeling at a given time, they will find it difficult to discern more detail about their emotions beyond the fact that they feel bad. Low emotion differentiators are more distracted and less engaged during times of stress, and also less capable of thinking carefully about their options for how to behave under stress. High emotion differentiators spend less time on counterproductive practices, such as ruminating and venting. When people are better at differentiating their negative emotions, they have better emotional control, which means they have more ways of dealing with anger. So, they're less likely to turn to aggression in the first place. Feeling angry is a part of life, but being aware of what kind of negativity you're feeling can help you control it and get over it. Human activities, such as burning fossil fuels, are warming Earth's climate. The climate crisis has widespread ramifications. Ecologists are worried that many species will become extinct, because they might not be able to adapt to a climate change that's faster than most naturally occurring ones. It's possible that some plants and animals could adapt by shifting their habitats towards Earth's poles, or towards higher elevations, to avoid the heat. Since ecosystems are varied and complex, ecologists can only find out by studying many specific cases. A team of American ecologists explored this possibility for a species of hummingbirds native to North America's west coast, called Anna's hummingbird.